the truth of those words as Paul talks about them, asking, Lord, take this away. Surely I've learned the lessons I need to learn. Surely I've been humbled enough. Probably there aren't many diseases that are as humbling as Parkinson's, or that gradually lose control of various movements when you're out in public and suddenly your hand. The truth of those words as Paul talks about them, asking, Lord, take this away. Surely I've learned the lessons I need to learn. Surely I've been humbled enough. Probably there aren't many diseases that are as humbling as Parkinson's, or that gradually lose control of various movements when you're out in public and suddenly your hand flips out and knocks their coffee cup out. Sometimes you bash people in the face. I've had that experience at times at gatherings. My arm will suddenly have a mind of its own and just flip out and have whack women across the face. And what do you say? I've at times felt I ought to have a yellow caution flag around me, saying danger, beware. And although we don't get to choose the difficulties we have, one of the things that's become very clear to me since I've had this is that everybody has something difficult to deal with in life. There's something that won't go away, that won't get better somehow. They have to learn to live with it. That's what I believe is redemptive suffering, if you will. And that God can work through that, can bring good out of it. But it really forces us to rely upon Him. One of the things I have found is God keeps me on a very short leash with this Parkinson's. I never dare get too far away from Him. And that there are always choices I do have. And I believe the choices we all have when we face difficulties. When we come to the point of feeling there are no choices, that's when depression and even despair can really set in. So it's been helpful to me to always try and focus on what choices do I have. Okay, I can't play tennis and basketball like I could, but I can go out and I can maybe play golf for a while. I can't run in a marathon. Actually, I never could. I hated running. But I can go to the Y and work out different points of the day. I can do different things. The key for me has been learning to be flexible, learning to be satisfied with what I can do, to push the limits where I can, but where the limits are unmovable, not to beat my head against the wall and be frustrated by that. There are times I can read, times I can't read, times I can work at the computer, times I can't, times I can exercise, other times I just need to be flat on my back in bed. There have been all sorts of cycles with medications. New medications have been developed over the years that have been very, very helpful. I feel for all those suffering with Parkinson's that this is probably as good a time as any to have it in terms of some of the breakthroughs being made in technology, surgery. Were I to be cured of Parkinson's tomorrow, it's not going to change why I get up in the morning, what my real reason for living is. Those things that are most important to me are separate from Parkinson's. And the goal of my life is not to be cured of Parkinson's, although that would be nice. And were this surgery to have the miraculous effect that's hoped for, it's not touted to be a cure, but very helpful with the symptoms. I wouldn't look back on the last 12 years as a loss by any means, because the lessons I've learned, the new things I've learned, there's no other way that could have happened apart from this. And I often wish there were an easier way, but somehow it doesn't seem to be an easier way to grow and mature in our lives at times. And the openness I find that people have in being able to relate to me through the Parkinson's is amazing. In any situation is important. There are lots of pluses about Parkinson's, believe it or not. One, people tend to like you better somehow, I think. It's bad somebody that has Parkinson's and it covers a multitude of sins. I can always get a good parking spot at a sporting event, a concert, or whatever, with this little blue handicapped card I have. I get to take a nap every afternoon. I got to retire at the age of early 40s. And so again, the key for me is realizing the choices I have, allowing others to care for me in appropriate ways, and that's often the most difficult things. One of the things I had to learn early on with Parkinson's is not only did I have to learn how to deal with it myself, but I had to learn how to help others deal with it. I had to be part of that process. I had to be willing to explain what was going on, because there's so many different changes that go on with something like Parkinson's that people just don't know what it's all about. For instance, right now all these movements are not really the Parkinson, they're a side effect of the medication I'm taking. There's a little too much of the medication in my system right now. But if that medication wasn't in my system, I'd be immobilized. And so there's always that roller coaster ride throughout the day of going through different cycles. When I'm like this, I'm more distracting to other people. In a public place, you're always catching the eyes of people, and you're well aware of that. But when I slow down, which is the Parkinson's effect, I look more normal, but I can't do much, and I have a real sense of hopelessness. And if I try and unbutton a button or unbuckle my pants or tie my shoe, sometimes those tasks become almost impossible. But I can sit there pretty still, and if I don't try and do anything, I can look relatively normal. So the different cycles, sometimes, and I think the sense of humor is a wonderful gift God has given us in dealing with things. But I would get a kick out sometimes if I'm on a plane and maybe I get on and I barely can shuffle down the aisle to the seat. And again, I'm aware of people think, no, it's not that course. So then after being on the plane, we arrive at our destination, my medicine's kicked in, and I can pop on my seat, go to get my luggage, carry 4 big bags, and walk out the door, and I just see people watching me like, my gosh, what happened? What miracle took place? This guy that could hardly walk is now carrying these 4 big suitcases, and I just sort of smile and passing by or wink at them or something. I know I've given them a mystery to try to solve. It's unsolvable. Things like this have the capacity for making us bitter or making us better. And I owe a lot to my friend Tim Hansel. Some of the things he's written in his book, You've Got to Keep Dancing. How we can break down into these things, or we can break through. The joy is a choice, and the differences between joy and happiness. But happiness depends on the happenings in our life, the circumstances, and we can't control those, but joy is a choice. Joy runs deeper. It's that deep well that we can draw upon that will sustain us and nurture us, even when things are tough. And at the same time, I know lots of people, as a pastor, who seem to have all the things the world has to offer, and yet they're miserable inside. They don't know the joy. And they're striving for happiness they found to be empty. Sort of like cotton candy. It seems sweet at first, but there's no substance to it. So, on this day before the surgery, I have a lot of mixed feelings. One of the amazing experiences that I experienced back in '87 and am now is just a sense of being carried by the prayers of so many people through this congregation, through our pastors, covenant group of churches and pastors around the country and around the world, and just have such a sense of being in the Lord's hands. And there's nothing more any of us can ask for than that. And so there's a sense in which it's worth it just to be so carried in the prayers of others. And very few people, I realize, have that experience. And I'm hopeful for Wednesday. I look forward to it. I hope it'll help correct my slice and my golf swing. But I think it's the right thing to do, and I look forward to it. Hope that as we film after the surgery, can report some real positive gains. You ask how this has affected me spiritually. The question's why. It's affected me profoundly spiritually. It has forced me to put faith to the test, if you will. It's like rappelling when you have that safety rope there, and you always know it's there, but you don't really know it's going to hold you till you find yourself dangling by that safety rope. And there's a real confidence that comes in knowing that rope will hold. And I think for me, faith was somewhat like that. I came to make a personal confession of faith, accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior when I was a sophomore in high school through the Young Life Ministries out in Colorado. And came back, and I knew I was different, and things began to change slowly. But life went pretty well for me. I had my minor ups and downs, but people looked, they said, everything seemed to come pretty easy for Don. I wondered why. I asked why, driving home, but I think at the same time I had a profound sense of God's provision to that time. What I talked about all those years in faith and shared with others came to have real meaning. Faith was put to the test, and it held. Tough with family. It was tough talking with Karen about it. We each had to deal with it in our own way. Years later, as we met with the family counselor one day, we came to realize how hard it was for Jason, because he had known me before the Parkinson's had affected me. And he grieved deeply at that sense of loss. You could see how I lost various abilities athletically. He is a tremendous athlete in his own right. I could just see him identifying so much with that, and realizing what a terrible loss that would be for something like that to affect him when athletics was so important. At the same time, as we talked on that day with the family counselor and Joy shared, I realized Joy experienced it in an entirely different way, because Dad had always been this way. Dad was always a little bit weird. We have a saying in our family, everybody's a little bit weird. And so in that sense of loss, and each one of us had to process it in different ways. Somehow, because I was handling it so well, that made it difficult for the kids to handle. I can't, if Dad's doing so well with this, how can I be having such troubles asking questions? So those were tough things, but through it all, I'd say there's never a time where I felt abandoned by God. Without His strength, there were times it was difficult to pray, times I felt so lousy, times angry. I'd try and do something, I try and do it, and I tried to do it, and I couldn't do it. And to have a body that had always functioned so well suddenly not functioning at times, it caused me to throw myself to the ground and pound my fists, cry out. Occasionally throw things, but those times are probably relatively rare. Parkinson's is something that responds best to being disciplined, being flexible, and those seem to be two qualities God has blessed me with. I suppose if there was an ideal personality type to have Parkinson's, I would probably have that. Karen and I often say I'm real glad I have Parkinson's instead of her. We both laugh at that, but there's a certain truth in that God gives us the grace to handle whatever we have to face. And if I'd have known I was going to face this back in college, it would have been overwhelming, I'm sure, to me. But in a step-by-step way, somehow that Paul Footsteps talks about there. Oftentimes God carries us a single set of foot along the way when we're too weak to walk on our own. So I found the why question didn't really get me very far, nor was it a real pressing question. I didn't have a sense of being singled out for being zapped, because as I said earlier, everybody has something difficult they have to deal with. And quite frankly, I wouldn't want to trade positions with anybody else. I think I'm who God created me to be, and that's okay. I don't have a sense of, gee, if only I could do this, or only be like that, or only be like this, that, or the other person, because I know that there are areas of pain and suffering in others' lives too. With Parkinson's, now, at least I know what I'm dealing with at this point. Talked with me right after I was diagnosed, and he said, Parkinson's is like a disease of the will. Everything you do will become harder to do, but you've got to keep fighting it. You can't give up on it, because once you give up, you're through. I've seen a lot of people that give up with Parkinson's. Life becomes too difficult. But the people that I see do best are those that take it on as a challenge. It's a challenge to be conquered, and they're not going to be overcome by it, but they're going to overcome it. Again, for me, faith becomes absolutely crucial, because I know my own human resources are so limited. The resources of the Lord who created us is beyond belief. And so, even when I'm like this, becoming more and more immobilized, I know that God loves me, God's with me, God provides. Whether this Parkinson's is with me for the rest of my life, or whether the surgery has a major impact on that, God is still God. And that's what my hope's in. That's a hope that does not disappoint. A hope that can never be taken away. Because everything else can be taken away except the love of God. Nothing can separate us from that.